Millionaire CEO panics without a Japanese translator until the black cleaner took over. Adrian Moreno sat at the head of the gleaming glass boardroom table, fingers drumming a tense rhythm. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Toronto's skyline glittered in the morning sun, its promise of international prestige feeling cruelly out of reach. The $180 million partnership with the Japanese consortium was meant to propel his company into the global market, a dream years in the making. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was brittle with anticipation. Executives reviewed last-minute notes, their hushed voices betraying a shared unease they refused to name. Every detail had been planned meticulously: financial projections, cultural protocols, even gift exchanges. This meeting was supposed to be a coronation of Adrian's vision. Then the door burst open. His assistant stumbled in, breathless, eyes wide with dread. "Sir, we have a problem," she managed. "Emilia, the interpreter. She's quit. She's not coming." Silence slammed over the room like a steel door. Adrian blinked. For a second, the words didn't even register. Then they hit him with nauseating clarity. The Japanese delegation would arrive in 2 hours. They valued precision, respect, and clear communication, values Emilia had embodied flawlessly until now. Without an interpreter, there would be no deal. Worse, there would be humiliation. He felt the blood roaring in his ears. "Find someone else," he ordered, voice dangerously calm. The room exploded in frantic motion. Executives grabbed phones, called agencies, pleaded with contacts. Some simply froze. Adrian watched it all with cold detachment, the taste of failure rising in his throat. He forced himself to stand, adjusting his tailored suit as if that could restore order. But the truth was clear. No one could find a qualified interpreter with the right credentials and cultural fluency on such short notice. "Sir," his assistant whispered eventually, voice trembling, "no one's available. They all say it's impossible." Adrian didn't reply. He turned to the window, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The city lay sprawled before him, a monument to his ambition, now poised to swallow him whole. His mind raced. Investors, partners, headlines about a failed, botched negotiation, the humiliation of calling it off. The room behind him had fallen into a quiet panic. He could feel it. People shifting, glancing at him, waiting for direction he didn't have. Then a quiet voice cut through the tension. "I know how to speak Japanese." Everyone turned. It wasn't an executive. It wasn't anyone in a suit. It was Sophia Reyes, the night shift cleaner. She stood at the back of the room, mop in hand, face calm despite dozens of stunned eyes fixed on her. Oliver, the HR chief, actually snorted in disbelief. You're a cleaner," he said with an incredulous laugh. "Sit down. This is serious." But Sophia didn't move. She met Adrian's gaze directly, unwavering. "I'm serious," she repeated softly. "I speak Japanese. I can help." For a second, no one spoke. The absurdity of it hung heavy in the air. A janitor stepping up to save a multimillion-dollar negotiation? Oliver shook his head, disgust curling his lip. "Adrian, you can't be entertaining this. She's staff. She scrubs floors." Sophia's expression didn't flicker at the insult. She simply waited, patient and steady. Adrian watched her carefully. Something about her eyes struck him. They weren't pleading or frightened. They were calm, confident. He raised a hand to silence Oliver, who sputtered in outrage. "Are you sure about this?" Adrian asked quietly. Sophia nodded once. "Yes. I studied international languages in Japan before I came here. I'm fluent in Japanese. I know the culture and the etiquette. I can do this." The room was dead silent. Adrian's thoughts spun. Every instinct screamed this was insane. The stakes were too high. But what choice did he have? His people had come up with nothing. And there was something about the way she stood there, shoulders squared, eyes clear. Oliver burst out again. "Adrian, don't even think about it. She's a janitor. She'll embarrass us. This is humiliating." Adrian didn't answer him. He kept his gaze locked on Sophia. "Why are you cleaning floors if you have those qualifications?" he asked. Sophia hesitated for just a heartbeat. Then she spoke evenly. "Life took a turn. I moved here for family reasons. My credentials didn't transfer well. I needed work. This was steady, but I never forgot what I learned." He believed her. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the calmness in her voice, the quiet authority that suggested she was used to harder things than insults from Oliver. The rest of the room shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to say it, but they were out of time and options. Adrian drew a long breath. "Can you be ready in an hour?" he asked finally. "Yes," Sophia said. Oliver threw up his hands in disgust. "This is ridiculous. She's unprofessional. She's going to destroy this deal." Adrian turned on him sharply. "Enough." Oliver fell silent, face mottled red with anger. Adrian ran a hand over his face, feeling the exhaustion of too many late nights and the crushing weight of this single meeting. He couldn't afford pride or appearances. He needed results. He looked back at Sophia. "You're sure you can do this?" She nodded again. "I can." Adrian held her gaze for another moment, then gave a sharp nod. "Get her cleaned up. Get her appropriate clothes. Brief her on the meeting details. Now." His assistant scrambled to obey. The room remained hushed, stunned by the turn of events. Adrian sat back down slowly. For the first time since the disaster had broken, he felt a tiny, flickering spark of hope. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to think clearly. He didn't know if this gamble would work, but in Sophia's steady eyes, he saw something he desperately needed, someone who wasn't afraid, someone who wouldn't back down. And in that moment, that was worth more than any credential or title in the world. As the executives reluctantly began preparing for this last-minute change, Adrian leaned back in his chair and watched the skyline. Toronto's towers glowed in the morning sun, as if daring him to keep fighting. And he would. Because failure wasn't an option, and sometimes, salvation came from the last place you'd ever think to look. Adrian Moreno adjusted the cuffs of his dark tailored suit for what felt like the 100th time. The air in the glass-walled boardroom felt taut, too heavy to breathe. Just beyond the door, the soft rumble of the city vibrated like a warning bell. Inside, no one spoke. Executives sat stiffly around the gleaming table, eyes fixed on the door as if they could will time to slow. The moment they had been preparing for, agonizing over, perfecting, was here. But none of them felt ready, because 2 hours ago, they'd been one crisis away from disaster. Adrian's heart pounded as he glanced to his left. Sophia Reyes sat there, transformed. Gone were the janitor's coveralls. Instead, she wore a simple but elegant navy suit, her hair pinned neatly back, minimal makeup giving her an unassuming professionalism. Adrian's assistant had pulled off a miracle, finding clothes in the right size and rushing her through a frantic but efficient grooming session. But the real transformation was in her demeanor. Sophia sat straight-backed, hands resting lightly in her lap, face serene. Her gaze was calm and unflinching, belying the tension radiating from every other person in the room. Adrian's phone buzzed on the table. A brief message. "They're here." The words landed like a thunderclap. He swallowed hard, giving Sophia one last searching look. She met it steadily, offering the tiniest nod. He took a breath. "Show them in," he ordered. The heavy doors opened with a quiet, ominous hush. The Japanese delegation entered in a line of crisp suits and understated elegance. Their leader, Mr. Nakamura, wore a small, neutral smile that gave away nothing. Behind him, advisors and legal experts moved like chess pieces, settling into seats with unspoken precision. For a moment, no one said a word. Adrian rose, smoothing his tie. "Welcome," he began carefully. His voice, though steady, carried the brittle edge of stress. Sophia waited for him to finish, then spoke in Japanese, her voice gentle and precise. The words flowed with natural rhythm, no hesitation or clumsy phrasing. Her tone was carefully calibrated, respectful but not subservient, warm without being overly familiar. The delegation blinked in mild surprise. "Mr." Nakamura's eyebrows rose a fraction. Adrian watched as the initial frostiness in the room began to thaw, ever so slightly. Introductions continued. Adrian spoke a phrase or two, and Sophia translated with flawless accuracy, not just relaying words but adjusting tone, explaining cultural context when needed with brief, polite asides. She didn't dominate the conversation, she guided it. It was like watching an artist at work. When Mr. Nakamura made a pointed comment about the importance of mutual respect in partnerships, a subtle probe for any hint of arrogance on Adrian's part, Sophia didn't simply translate it word for word. She offered an elegant rendering that acknowledged the value of humility while assuring the delegation of Adrian's commitment to collaboration. The effect was immediate. The tension in Mr. Nakamura's shoulders loosened. He inclined his head slightly, the unspoken sign of approval. Adrian had seen interpreters before. None had done this. His executives shifted in their seats, glancing at each other with dawning relief. Some of them had doubted Sophia would even show up looking presentable. Now they watched her with something close to awe. Minutes turned into a half hour. The conversation moved from basic terms to nuanced discussions of intellectual property, revenue sharing, and cultural alignment. Through it all, Sophia was unshakable. She anticipated misunderstandings before they formed, offering clarifications that smoothed potential frictions. When an advisor from the Japanese side asked a question in rapid, colloquial Japanese, she didn't falter. She paused, smiled politely, and delivered an equally nuanced answer on Adrian's behalf. Adrian could feel his own heartbeat slowing. For weeks, he'd been haunted by visions of this meeting going off the rails. A mistranslated phrase offending their guests, an insult delivered by accident. But here, in this room, Sophia acted as a bridge over those pitfalls, her voice an invisible thread stitching two worlds together. And the delegation noticed. Their questions became less guarded. Their smiles, though small, grew more genuine. They leaned in, making notes, asking Adrian about his vision for the company, even sharing stories of their own business culture. By the 40-minute mark, the entire mood had shifted. Anxiety had faded, replaced by curiosity and cautious optimism. Adrian found himself actually engaging, making small jokes that landed, thanks to Sophia's deft interpretation. Mr. Nakamura even chuckled once. Adrian could have kissed her for that. He watched Sophia as she worked. She didn't interrupt. She didn't boast. She simply listened, absorbed nuance, and delivered meaning with a grace that made it look easy. But it wasn't easy. Adrian knew it. He could see the way her eyes tracked every tiny shift in expression across the table. The way she mirrored respectful bows with the perfect angle of her own head. The way she let a moment of silence stretch just long enough to show thoughtfulness before responding. It was mastery. And it wasn't just linguistic. It was cultural, emotional. She was attuned to them in a way no one else in the room was. At one point, Adrian's CFO fumbled a question about compliance standards, phrasing it in a way that could have sounded dismissive. Sophia didn't even blink. She smoothly rephrased it in Japanese as a request for partnership in meeting the consortium's high expectations. Adrian watched the advisors nod, impressed. He felt a flush of embarrassment at how close they'd come to blowing it, at how Oliver had tried to shut Sophia down. Oliver wasn't in the room anymore. Adrian had ordered him out before the meeting began. He felt the justice of that decision now like a satisfying weight in his chest. As the first hour of discussion ended, the delegation's chief legal advisor closed his folder with a soft click and gave Mr. Nakamura a meaningful nod. Mr. Nakamura turned to Adrian and smiled. Not a polite formality, but a small, real smile. "This is very productive," he said carefully in English. Adrian returned it with genuine relief. "I'm glad you feel that way," Sophia translated, her tone adding a respectful warmth that deepened the moment. And then they all stood, agreeing on a short recess. As the Japanese delegation filed out, quiet and dignified, Adrian finally allowed himself to sag into his chair. He turned to Sophia. She was adjusting her jacket calmly, preparing for the next phase. "Thank you," he said quietly. She didn't glow with triumph. She didn't boast. She simply met his eyes and nodded once. "I'm just doing my job," she said. But Adrian knew better. She wasn't just doing a job. She was saving everything. And for the first time that day, he felt sure they might actually pull this off. The meeting had finally found its rhythm. Hours of tense translation, delicate phrasing, and careful cultural maneuvering had paid off. The Japanese delegation now spoke with a calm, open confidence that suggested true progress. Sophia sat beside Adrian, posture perfect, voice smooth and precise. Every word she translated seemed to reduce the distance between two worlds by a few inches more. Adrian watched her with grudging admiration, even relief. She hadn't just saved the meeting. She was actively shaping it, guiding the conversation into safe harbors no one else had seen. The boardroom itself seemed transformed. What began as an icy battleground was now a place of genuine dialogue. When Mr. Nakamura suggested a brief recess to consider proposals privately, the room emptied in hushed, polite chatter. Adrian loosened his tie fractionally, exhaling slowly. His heart still beat fast, but for the first time that day, it wasn't from panic. He stood to stretch, watching his team file out to grab water and regroup. Sophia moved quietly to the side of the hall, reaching for the small notebook where she'd jotted key phrases and cultural reminders. That's when Oliver struck. He hadn't spoken much during the session, forced to sit back and watch the woman he'd ridiculed prove herself in front of the entire executive team. But now, outside the direct scrutiny of clients and bosses, his simmering contempt finally boiled over. He approached her with a slow, deliberate swagger, voice pitched just low enough not to carry to the others gathering near the refreshment table. "Well, look at you," he drawled, eyes scanning her professional outfit with mocking disdain. "All dressed up, playing executive. Must be a real change from scrubbing toilets." Sophia didn't react. She carefully closed her notebook, her fingers steady. Oliver leaned closer, crowding her personal space. "Let's get something straight," he continued, voice hardening. "You're not one of us. You're here because Moreno had no choice. Don't start getting ideas above your station." She finally raised her eyes to his. Calm. Steady. "I'm here because the company needed help," she replied evenly. "That's all I'm trying to do." Oliver sneered. "Help? Don't fool yourself. They'll thank you now and forget you tomorrow. You're embarrassing all of us with this little stunt. You don't belong in that room." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Sophia's voice didn't waver when she answered. "I belong wherever I can do the most good. Right now, that's in there, making sure this deal doesn't collapse. I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing it for the company. For all of us." Her eyes didn't leave his. The quiet dignity in them was sharper than any insult. Oliver flushed, fury twisting his features. He leaned even closer. "You're nothing but a cleaner. Don't forget that. If you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut and follow orders. Don't get cute thinking you're suddenly indispensable." She blinked once, slowly. "I don't need to be indispensable," she said. "I just need to do my job well. That's enough for me." Oliver opened his mouth to retort but stopped as a shadow fell over them. Adrian had been walking down the hall, collecting his thoughts, planning next steps. He'd noticed Oliver slithering off on his own, had heard enough of the rising venom to quicken his pace. Now he stood just behind them, expression unreadable. "Oliver," Adrian said, voice deceptively mild. Oliver jolted like a schoolboy caught mouthing off in class. He straightened quickly, schooled his features into false civility. "Adrian." "Sir, I was just making sure everything was in order before we resume." Adrian cut him off with a raised hand. His eyes didn't leave Sophia's face. "You okay?" Sophia met his gaze with that same calm. She nodded once. "I'm fine," she said quietly. Adrian let the silence hang for another heartbeat. He turned his head slowly to Oliver. "I want you back in the boardroom," Adrian said in an icy tone. "Now." Oliver hesitated, mouth opening and closing, but finally turned on his heel and stalked off. Adrian watched him go, jaw tight, then looked back at Sophia. For the first time that day, she looked tired. Not weak, never that, but tired. He lowered his voice. "I'm sorry about that." She shook her head. "It doesn't matter." "It does," Adrian said. They stood in silence for a moment. Adrian's mind raced. He thought of how many times he'd taken Oliver's loyalty for granted, how many whispered warnings he'd brushed off as office politics. And he thought about Sophia, standing her ground in the middle of all of this, with no promise of reward except knowing she'd done the right thing. He nodded at last. "Let's get back in there," he said. "We're not done yet." Sophia gave the smallest of smiles. "No," she agreed softly. "We're not." And together they turned, walking side by side back toward the boardroom doors. The room fell into a hushed, brittle silence as the conversation edged onto dangerous ground. The contract was nearly finalized, but the Japanese delegation had paused, their measured politeness concealing flickers of unease. Adrian felt sweat prick his collar. The sticking point was a single clause on exclusivity rights, a term standard in his industry, but fraught with cultural pitfalls here. He glanced at Sophia, seated calmly at his side, notebook closed, eyes fixed on Mr. Nakamura. She gave the slightest nod, her voice low and even. "You should phrase it as a gesture of mutual trust, not a demand. Emphasize partnership, not control." Adrian took a breath. He turned back to the delegation, voice steady. "We believe exclusivity demonstrates the respect we have for our partners and the trust we want to build together." Sophia translated smoothly, choosing words that framed it as a shared commitment rather than a restriction. Across the table, Mr. Nakamura's stony expression softened, and his advisors exchanged approving nods. Adrian felt hope surge in his chest. Then Oliver shifted in his chair. He let out a low, mocking chuckle. "Oh, come on," he drawled, cutting across the discussion. "Do they really need that spelled out? It's a contract, not a marriage proposal." The effect was instant. The Japanese delegation stiffened. Mr. Nakamura's eyes narrowed, the room's temperature dropping 10 degrees in a heartbeat. Adrian's heart sank. Sophia didn't blink. She leaned forward, her voice clear and warm as she addressed the delegation directly in perfect Japanese. She offered a formal apology for the unfortunate remark, explaining it as a misunderstanding of cultural nuance, not a sign of disrespect. Her words were humble but precise, acknowledging fault while reaffirming the company's dedication to mutual respect. For a moment, the entire room held its breath. Then Mr. Nakamura inclined his head, a slow, deliberate gesture of acceptance. The tension ebbed away like a receding tide. His advisors returned her apology with small, polite smiles. Adrian exhaled shakily. He turned to Sophia, eyes filled with quiet gratitude. She simply gave him the smallest of nods, ready to continue. They returned to the boardroom after the brief recess, the heavy doors closing behind them with a muffled thud that seemed to seal the tension back inside. Adrian adjusted his tie and took his seat at the head of the polished glass table. He could feel the gravity of the moment pressing on his shoulders. Mr. Nakamura and his advisors settled opposite him, their expressions calm but expectant. They had agreed to the terms, pinning signatures. All that remained was the final review, the ceremonial nod of agreement that would lock in $180 million and the company's long-sought leap onto the world stage. Adrian tried to steady his breathing. He offered a small, polite smile across the table. "Shall we continue?" he said carefully. Sophia sat quietly at his side, her notebook ready, posture perfect. She translated with gentle formality, her Japanese precise and respectful. The delegation leader nodded, signaling their readiness. It should have been the easiest moment of the day. But Adrian couldn't shake the memory of the recess. Oliver's simmering resentment, his mocking laugh at the cultural nuances Sophia had so carefully navigated. He'd watched Oliver dismiss their guests' traditions as unnecessary fluff, under his breath, unaware that Adrian stood behind him. Enough was enough. Adrian cleared his throat. "Before we finalize this," he began, his voice a touch sharper, "I'd like to address something important." The room went still. Oliver looked up from his papers, eyes narrowing in suspicion. "No? Really?" he snapped in a low voice. "Yes," Adrian said, louder. "Now." The Japanese advisors glanced at one another, sensing the shift in tone. Adrian turned his gaze to Oliver, steady and unflinching. "I've let a lot slide today, Oliver. Too much, frankly. Your attitude toward our guests. Your dismissal of one of the most important contributors to this meeting. The entire way you've represented this company. It's unacceptable." Oliver's lip curled. "Oh, come on," he spat. "You're going to air this out now? In front of them?" He waved a hand dismissively at the delegation. Adrian didn't blink. "Yes," he said firmly. Sophia shifted slightly, closing her notebook with careful precision. Her eyes were focused, her jaw tight, but when she spoke, her voice was calm. "Adrian," she said softly, "there's something else." Oliver turned on her, sneering. "Oh, of course. The cleaning lady's going to lecture us all now? Don't act like you're one of them." Sophia didn't flinch. She looked only at Adrian. "For years," she began, voice clear, "I've seen him falsify expense records. He's billed the company for trips that never happened, meals that didn't exist. I've seen him submit paperwork with altered signatures. I know he's quietly undermined partnership talks with smaller vendors so he could steer work to companies that pay him under the table." Silence slammed into the room. The Japanese delegation sat like statues, their polite reserve hiding curiosity, but their eyes sharp and attentive. Adrian felt his pulse in his ears. Oliver's face went red, then pale. "That's ridiculous," Oliver sputtered, voice rising. "She's a cleaner. She's lying." Sophia didn't even turn toward him. She opened her folder slowly, deliberately. "I anticipated you might say that," she continued in that same calm voice. She slid a small stack of printed records across the table to Adrian. Expense reports with suspiciously identical receipts for different cities. Copies of emails she'd found left open on communal terminals, showing him instructing subordinates to approve fraudulent reimbursements. Notes of company checks cut to shell vendors. Adrian's fingers were rigid on the paper. "This is months of evidence," Sophia said. Her voice cracked just a little, but she forced it steady again. "I didn't want to interfere. It wasn't my place. But today, watching him disrespect you, watching him risk this deal with our partners, I realize silence is complicity." Oliver was out of his chair now, livid. "You ungrateful little, enough." Adrian's voice cracked like a whip. The whole room froze. Oliver glared at him, panting. Adrian stood slowly. He placed the papers on the table in front of Oliver. I trusted you, he said, voice low and dangerous. I let you represent this company. I let you sit at my table. Oliver made a scoffing noise, face twisted in anger. You're going to take her word over mine? A cleaner? She's been here 5 minutes. Adrian shook his head. No, he said softly. She's been here for years. Quietly. Watching. Learning. Serving this company better than you ever did. Today she did more to save us than you have in a decade. Oliver opened his mouth, but Adrian didn't give him the chance. You're finished, Adrian said coldly. Clean out your desk. Don't come back. Oliver stared, mouth opening and closing, the words catching in his throat. He looked around, seeking sympathy, finding only cold silence from the executives. The Japanese delegation sat still, eyes narrowed but approving now, watching the drama with unspoken judgment. Oliver finally let out a strangled curse and stormed from the room. The door swung closed behind him with a hollow thud. Silence fell. Adrian stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the space Oliver had vacated. He turned slowly to Sophia. She met his eyes without blinking, though her face was pale. Thank you, he said, voice breaking just a little. She inclined her head, the movement respectful but not submissive. I only did what was right, she said softly. Adrian drew a deep breath, turned back to the delegation. He spread his hands in apology. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said carefully. Sophia translated without hesitation, her voice flawless despite the tremor of emotion. Mr. Nakamura regarded him for a long moment, then nodded gravely. It is better to see the truth than to be sold a lie, he replied in slow English. Sophia didn't even need to translate that. Adrian exhaled. He gestured to the documents in front of them. Shall we continue? The delegation murmured their agreement. Pins were uncapped. As signatures were finally added to the last page, Sophia sat in silence, notebook closed, hands folded in her lap. But Adrian noticed her exhale at last, a slow, quiet release of tension she'd carried alone for years. And for the first time all day, he let himself smile. The door had barely finished swinging shut behind Oliver before a heavy silence settled over the boardroom, dense as fog after a storm. The air felt raw, electric with the leftover charge of conflict. Adrian Moreno stood frozen, watching the space Oliver had occupied like he expected his disgraced HR chief to reappear in defiance. But there was nothing. Just the quiet shuffle of papers, the hushed breath of executives stunned by the revelation of fraud and betrayal. And beside him sat Sophia Reyes. She was very still, hands folded in her lap, eyes lowered, the soft rise and fall of her breathing the only sign of her exhaustion. She looked like someone trying not to collapse from the sheer weight of the day. Adrian turned to her, the fury in his chest cooling to something gentler, something far more complex. Thank you, he said, voice low but unwavering. She looked up, blinking in surprise. He held her gaze, letting the words sink in. I mean it, he added. Not just for today. Not just for saving the deal. But for saving this company from rotting from the inside out. Sophia swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened slightly before relaxing again. I just did what needed to be done, she said quietly. Adrian shook his head. No, he corrected softly. You did what none of us did. What I wouldn't even see. The executives in the room shifted awkwardly, but none of them contradicted him. The Japanese delegation, watching with polite reserve, said nothing, but their careful attention spoke volumes. Adrian straightened, forcing his voice steady and diplomatic as he turned back to them. I apologize for the disruption, he said formally. But it seems even moments like this can reveal a company's true character. Sophia translated, her voice clear despite the faint tremor in her chest. Mr. Nakamura inclined his head gravely. We appreciate your transparency, he said in careful English. It is good to know who one is truly dealing with. Adrian exhaled, and for the first time that day, a genuine smile cracked the tension on his face. The final terms were reviewed, the signatures placed on crisp paper with ceremonial gravity. Sophia translated every phrase, her tone respectful and unwavering. When Mr. Nakamura finally capped his pen and closed the folder with a satisfied nod, the entire room seemed to exhale as one. There were polite bows, formal words of appreciation, even the hint of a smile on the delegation leader's face. Adrian extended his hand. Mr. Nakamura took it firmly. It will be an honor to work with you, Adrian said. It already is, Mr. Nakamura replied. Sophia translated it all, and then, with a quiet grace, lowered her hands, her work finished. But she didn't leave. She didn't fade into the background or slip away unnoticed. She stayed right there, at Adrian's side, as the guests left the room with dignified satisfaction. As soon as the door closed behind the delegation, the executives erupted into relieved laughter, slapping each other's backs, collecting papers in manic joy. The impossible deal was done. Adrian didn't join them. He just looked at Sophia. Her shoulders had finally sagged. The professional mask slipped just a fraction, revealing the bone-deep fatigue in her eyes. He placed a hand lightly on the table, leaning toward her. "You didn't just save the deal," he said, voice lowered for only her to hear. "You saved us. This company. From the inside out." Sophia opened her mouth as if to protest, but he held up a finger. "No," he said. "Don't argue. Just take it in." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away, nodding once. "Thank you," she whispered. He offered a wry, tired smile. "No," he replied. "Thank you." They left the boardroom together. Days later, the mood in the office was transformed. Rumors had spread like wildfire, but the official word was clear. The biggest deal in the company's history had closed. People walked taller, spoke more confidently. Investors called with congratulations instead of threats. The staff was already preparing for new hires, new projects, new markets. In the middle of all of it, Sophia kept working. She met with the new cultural consultants they'd hired at her urging. She reviewed translated contracts. She offered advice quietly but firmly. But she remained officially a cleaner. Until Adrian called a formal meeting. They gathered in the same boardroom where everything had nearly fallen apart. This time, the air was light, the sun streaming through the tall windows like an omen of better days. Sophia sat at the edge of the room, clutching her notebook, uncertain why she'd even been invited. Adrian stood at the head of the table. "Before we begin," he said, voice carrying with calm authority, "I have an announcement." Every eye turned to him. He turned to Sophia. "Stand up, please," he said. She blinked, cheeks coloring, but obeyed. Adrian's eyes locked on hers, steady, warm, respectful. "This company owes you more than it can ever repay," he said. "Not just for your skill and talent, which saved us at the most critical moment, but for your honesty, your integrity, your courage to speak when no one else would." He let the words hang. "And I'm not going to let that go unrecognized." He reached for a folder on the table. "Effective immediately," he continued, voice ringing with authority, "Sophia Reyes is our new head of global partnerships." The room fell silent. A few people gasped. A couple of them actually clapped before realizing what they were doing. Sophia's eyes widened. "Adrian," she whispered. He shook his head. "You earned it," he said. She looked around, the room blurring with unshed tears. She swallowed hard, forced her chin up, and nodded once. "I accept," she said firmly. And in that moment, she wasn't the cleaner. She wasn't the afterthought. She was the woman who had saved them all, who had seen what no one else did, who would guide them into the future with a wisdom they'd failed to notice for years. Adrian smiled at her then, full and genuine. And for the first time in too long, Sophia let herself smile back. Not small. Not apologetic, but wide and unguarded. Ready? If you enjoyed Sophia Reyes and Adrian Moreno's story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Tell us what you think about how it all ended. How would you rate this story on a scale of 10? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your location and perspective.